You're listening to Audiology. Support our work on Patreon and be sure to submit your requests for topics in the comments below. During the 1948 Palestine War, over 700,000 Palestinian Arabs, approximately half of the Arab population of Mandatory Palestine, either fled their homes or were forcibly expelled. This significant event occurred initially at the hands of Zionist paramilitary groups and later by the military of the newly established State of Israel. This mass departure and expulsion played a crucial role in the fracturing and displacement of Palestinian society, an episode referred to as the Nakba. Israeli military forces conducted dozens of massacres against Arabs, and it is estimated that between 400 and 600 Palestinian villages were either destroyed or severely damaged. Tactics such as poisoning village wells and looting properties were employed to ensure that Palestinian refugees could not return. Additionally, attempts were made to erase Palestinian heritage through the Hebraization of place names. The exact number of Palestinian refugees, many of whom found refuge in neighboring state camps, remains a point of contention. Around 80% of the Arab residents of what is now Israel, representing half of Mandatory Palestine's Arab population, were displaced. Between 250,000 and 300,000 Palestinians had already been fleeing or expelled before the end of the British Mandate on May 14, 1948. During the 1947 to 1948 civil war in Mandatory Palestine, the entry of the Arab League into the conflict was partly motivated by a desire to prevent further Palestinian collapse and displacement, marking the beginning of the 1948 Arab-Israeli War. The reasons behind the 1948 Palestinian exodus are widely debated among historians. Contributing factors include Jewish military actions, the destruction of Arab villages, psychological warfare, fears incited by massacres such as Deir Yassin, direct expulsion orders from Israeli authorities, the influence of wealthier classes leaving, a typhoid epidemic resulting from well poisoning, a breakdown in Palestinian leadership, and unwillingness to live under Jewish rule. Subsequently, Israeli laws were enacted that barred Arabs who had left from returning to their homes or reclaiming their property. This has left them and their descendants in a prolonged state of displacement. The expulsion of Palestinians is considered by some historians to be an act of ethnic cleansing, though this characterization is not universally accepted. The existence of Israel's law of return, which grants immigration and naturalization rights to any Jewish person and their family, contrasted with the denial of a similar right of return for Palestinians, is seen by some as evidence of apartheid practices by Israel. The debate over the right of these refugees to return to their homes or receive compensation remains a central issue in the ongoing Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The events leading to the Palestinian expulsion are memorialized annually on May 15th, known as Nakba Day. During the early stages of the civil war, tensions escalated in the Mandate of Palestine. Both Arab and Jewish leaders were keep the peace, as historian Benny Morris notes. Yet the time was filled with Palestinian Arab assaults and Jewish defense, which eventually led to retaliatory actions by the Jews. Sima Flappen points out that the Jewish groups Irgun and Lehi's aggressive actions provoked Palestinian Arab backlash. These Jewish reprisals targeted areas believed to be sources of attacks, often resulting in more severe consequences, such as death and destruction of property. Irgun and Lehi returned to a tactic of indiscriminate violence, bombing crowded places, which made it harder for British forces to maintain order. The situation worsened with economic instability and rising unemployment amid rumors of planned attacks. Writer Yoav Gelber mentions that the Arab Liberation Army began moving civilians from strategic locations, making these areas military sites. This led to many Palestinian Arabs moving away, with some leaving the country. In March 1948, about 30 villages had been emptied of their Palestinian Arab inhabitants, with an estimated 100,000 fleeing to safer areas or other countries. Yet, there was a significant attempt to prevent panic among the population, with limitations on who could receive exit visas. The Haganah, a Jewish military group, was advised to moderate its actions to avoid further conflict, especially with the British. Initially, it embraced a strategy of aggressive defense in line with pre-existing plans for maintaining security. This included retaliation against attack, but also targeted assassinations of enemy leaders, though resources for such plans were limited. Some Palestinian Arabs were forcibly removed from their homes, practice not universally sanctioned. Historian Ilan Pape discusses how the Haganah's strategy evolved from retaliation to more offensive measures, including intimidation and direct attack. A key meeting in January 1948, led by Ben-Gurion, focused on the desire to relocate as many Arabs as possible from Jewish territories, using February attacks as a learning opportunity for future operations. According to Pape, there was a detailed plan for handling the Arab population, but Yoav Gelber clarifies that expulsion was to occur only in cases of resistance. Despite these tumultuous events, the Arab military efforts were not well coordinated, and the British believed the violence could have subsided had the Jews avoided retaliatory attacks. Finally, Morris concludes that the majority of early Arab evacuations were due to fear of or actual Jewish attacks, rather than direct expulsion orders. Before Israel declared its independence on the 14th of May 1948, a significant movement of Palestinians had already taken place. By the 1st of May, nearly 175,000 Palestinians, that's about a quarter of their population, had left their homes. The violence leading up to this moment was mainly around Jerusalem and Tel Aviv. One particular event that sparked widespread fear was the Deir Yassin massacre on the 9th of April, alongside other military actions by Jewish forces in areas like Tiberias and Haifa. The massacre especially created panic, leading to many Palestinians fleeing their homes in fear of more violence. Deir Yassin is often highlighted as a turning point, with Meron Benvenisti noting its critical role in the destruction of the Arab presence in the region. Moreover, during April, there were reports of Israel conducting biological warfare, like poisoning water supplies, with a notable outbreak of typhoid in Acre as a result. In Haifa, the departure of Palestinians was dramatic. Historian Ephraim Karsh points out that before the final battle in late April, about half of Haifa's Arab population had already left. During the battle, between 5,000 to 15,000 more left, seemingly of their own accord. Yet, this account is disputed by others who argue there was no direct order from Arab leaders for these departures. The Haganah, a Jewish military group, used mortar attacks and psychological warfare to weaken Arab morale in Haifa. Their tactics, including broadcasting warnings and attacking civilian areas, were meant to encourage the Arab population to leave, aiming for a quick collapse of resistance. Despite some efforts by Jewish leaders in Haifa to encourage Arabs to stay, the city saw a significant decrease in its Arab population. By mid-May, around 4,000 Arabs remained, mainly in the Wadi Nisnas area, while the systematic destruction of Arab housing by Israeli forces continued as part of a pre-war plan. Starting from May 15, 1948, Glazer noted that the expulsion of Palestinians became a recurring practice. Avnery shed light on the thinking behind this strategy, pointing out that the eviction of Arab civilians was targeted by David Ben-Gurion and his governance. They believed that ignoring United Nations opinions and the pursuit of a homogeneous Hebrew state through acquiring uninhabited territory were justifiable given the improbability of peace and the extremity Arab propaganda. Morris's investigation into various records highlights that the primary cause for the Palestinian departure from April to June was Jewish military action. This conclusion is supported by the timing of these exoduses, closely linked to military attacks, and a tendency among commanders to undertake cleansing operations as the British withdrawal and potential Arab invasion loomed closer. O'Balance adds that Israeli forces actively removed Arab populations, using loudspeakers and, at times, force. This was part of a clear strategy to clear the areas they advanced into of Arab residents, pushing them towards Arab territories. Significantly, on May 9, 1948, a decision targeted villages harassing Jewish traffic near Haifa for expulsion or subjugation, aligning with Plan Dalet's objective of cleansing Palestine. The coastal village of Tentura experienced such military action on the night of May 22 to 23, 1948, resulting in the capture and expulsion of its residents. A Haganah military intelligence report from June 30, 1948, disclosed that their operations were responsible for over half of the Palestinian exodus, with additional contributions from Irgun and Lehi actions, explicit Israeli expulsion orders, and psychological warfare. Moreover, the report suggested that Arab calls for flight had a minimal effect, contrasting the claim from the Secretary General of the League of Arab States that over 250,000 Arabs were compelled to migrate due to these actions. In terms of numbers, Morris estimates that 250,000 to 300,000 Palestinians left Israel during this time, which is consistent with figures cited before Israel's independence, emphasizing the significant impact of these operations on the Palestinian population. The beginning of the third phase of expulsions, marked by Israeli operations named Dani and Dekel, broke the existing truce. This phase saw the forced expulsion of 60,000 people from the cities of Lydda and Ramla on July 14th, making it the largest single expulsion event of the war. This expulsion, ordered by David Ben-Gurion and Yitzhak Rabin, led to the harrowing events known as the Lida Death March, where inhabitants were forcibly removed. According to the scholar Flappen, in 1987, Ben-Gurion saw Lida and Ramla as particularly threatening due to their location, which could potentially facilitate cooperation between the Egyptian army and the Arab Legion. Despite the initial assumption, the operation to seize the towns showed no evidence of such cooperation. Regarding the expulsion, Flappen notes significant differences in how it was carried out in each city. In Lida, people were made to leave on foot, whereas in Ramla, transportation was provided. Initially, males were detained, but following a misinterpreted incident, Ben-Gurion ordered a swift eviction of all residents, including women, children, and the elderly, justifying it by saying those who waged war bore responsibility for their defeat. Yitzhak Rabin, in his memoirs, described the moral dilemma of dealing with the civilian population in Lida, highlighting Ben-Gurion's decisive but silent gesture that effectively ordered their expulsion. He acknowledged the psychological difficulty and the forced nature of the evacuation. Further insights from Flappen reveal a pattern of expulsion, highlighting a contrasting situation in Nazareth, which surrendered to the Israeli Defense Forces 3 days after the Lida and Ramla evictions. Despite a surrender agreement promising safety, an order for expulsion was issued, but ultimately not carried out, due to refusal by the commanding officer, Ben Dunkelman. Reports of widespread looting and some instances of rape emerged during these events. Overall, these events contributed to the displacement of around 100,000 Palestinians, leading to a significant refugee issue. Notably, Count Bernadotte, the United Nations mediator, reported the mass exodus was sparked by fear and rumors of acts of terrorism or expulsion. Later developments saw discussions within the Israeli cabinet regarding how to handle the return of Palestinians, with proposals ranging from endless harassment to biological warfare operations against neighboring countries, although these extreme measures were never implemented. During this period, the Israeli military led several key operations that shaped the course of territory control. In October, Operation Yoav opened up the path to the Negev, successfully securing Beersheba. Around the same time, Operation Hahar cleaned out resistance in the Jerusalem corridor. By the end of October, Operation Hiram enabled the capture of the Upper Galilee. Moving into December 1948 and March 1949, Operations Horev and Uvda, respectively, finalized the control over the Negev, a region designated for the Jewish state by the United Nations. These military actions faced pushback from Palestinian Arabs, many of whom became refugees. In the areas of conflict, especially the Galilee and the sparse Negev desert, local villages were aware that leaving their homes meant a slim chance of return. Consequently, spontaneous departures from these villages were less common. A significant part of the Palestinian exodus can be directly attributed to expulsion and systematic harassment. According to historian Morris, military leaders were intent on removing the population from areas under their control. For instance, during Operation Hiram in the Upper Galilee, commanders were instructed to expedite the removal of all hostile elements, aiding their departure from the newly conquered territories, as directed by Moshe Carmel on the 31st of October, 1948. The acting mediator of the United Nations, Ralph Bunche, reported extensive looting of Galilean villages by Israeli forces who transported livestock using army trucks in what seemed to be a coordinated effort. This looting led to a new wave of refugees moving into Lebanon. Bunche observed that Israeli forces had taken position in parts of Lebanon, including about 15 Lebanese villages. Historian Morris estimates that between 200,000 and 230,000 Palestinians fled during Operations Hiram and Yoav. Another historian, Ilan Pape, highlights the severe impact of these operations. Within 7 months, 531 villages were destroyed, and 11 urban areas were emptied, alongside reports of massacres, rapes, and the detention of men in labor camps for extended periods. The term Nakba began to be used following the events of 1948, first introduced by Constantin Zurich, a history professor at the American University of Beirut. In his book published that year, The Meaning of the Disaster, he described the Nakba as a profound disaster, unparalleled in Arab history. The term captures the essence of a catastrophe, as noted by Zurich, who emphasized its tragic and enduring nature. The following year, Palestinian poet Burhan al-Din al-Abushi also used the term. Later, Aref al-Aref and Muhammad Nimr al-Hawari further contributed to its use in depicting the immense losses and expulsion faced by the Arab and Palestinian people. In the aftermath, particularly after the 1967 Six-Day War, Zurich continued to explore the concept in his works. The Nakba has deeply influenced Palestinian identity, symbolized through Naji al-Ali's Handala character and the symbolic house keys held by many refugees. This collective memory and the significant cultural impact, with its expressions in literature, music, and poetry, underscore the profound sense of loss and displacement. The events surrounding the Nakba and its representation have generated significant discussion and controversy. For instance, Hanan Ashrawi, in 2001, highlighted the ongoing struggles of Palestinians in terms of colonialism, apartheid, and victimization. Additionally, Nakba Day, observed on the 15th of May, serves as a poignant reminder of these events, despite efforts such as a proposed bill in 2009 by Avigdor Lieberman's party to outlaw its commemoration. A proposal met with significant criticism and ultimately softened in its final form passed by the Knesset in 2011. The interpretations of the Nakba and its aftermath vary, with some Israeli narratives suggesting voluntary departure of Palestinians or attributing it to Arab leadership decisions, which has been contested by writers like Ghada Karmi. She critiques the denial of Israeli responsibility and the framing of Palestinians as the culprit for rejecting United Nations partition proposals. Perry Anderson notes the speed and devastating impact of the Nakba, leaving a void in Palestinian political organizations for years. Through these discussions, the Nakba remains a central event in understanding the Palestinian experience and the broader Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Let's talk about how Israel and its Jewish citizens view the exodus of Palestinians, which can be divided into two distinct eras. The first one spans from 1949 to the late 1970s, and the second from the late 1970s to today, marked by the emergence of historians known as the New Historians. From 1949, the story most often told in Israel, through state institutions like the National Information Center, the Ministry of Education, the Israeli Defense Forces, and also in newspapers and memoirs of the 1948 war veterans, emphasized a narrative where Palestinians left either by choice or were expelled by Jewish or Israeli forces. However, there were a few voices, such as the weekly Ha'olam Haza, the Communist Party's Kol Ha'am, and the socialist organization Matzpen, that presented a more Palestinian-centric or balanced critique. Also, scholars like Gabay and Peretz, who lived outside Israel, offered different perspectives from the late 1950s. The narrative began to shift in the late 1970s. More and more, Israeli newspapers, scholarly research, and even memoirs from Jewish veterans of the 1948 war began to share a more nuanced story. This story acknowledged that while some Palestinians left on their own due to various pressures, others were indeed expelled by fighting forces. This shift towards a more balanced narrative gained momentum by the late 1980s and was reflected in the vast majority of media and scholarly work, and even in some school textbooks, though not all were officially sanctioned by the Ministry of Education. This period also saw the rise of the New Historians, Israeli scholars who were critical of Israel's historical narrative. These historians, such as Ilan Pappé and Benny Morris, debated the nature of the Palestinian exodus, with Pappé calling it ethnic cleansing and providing details he believed to show premeditated planning, a view that has faced significant criticism for its accuracy and perspective. In contrast, Benny Morris acknowledged the occurrence of ethnic cleansing, but argued that in some historical contexts, it could be seen as a lesser evil. The debate among these historians is intense, reflecting deep divisions in interpretation and understanding of the events of 1948. In 2015, Shai Piron, a former education minister, pushed for the Nakba, the term Palestinians used to describe their mass displacement in 1948, to be taught in all Israeli schools. His stance aimed at addressing racial tensions in Israeli society but faced resistance, especially from lawmakers opposed to acknowledging the Nakba in educational curriculums. The 1948 Palestinian exodus has been compared to the mass migration and expulsion of Jews from Arab and Muslim countries from 1948 into the 1970s. However, this comparison is contentious. Israeli historian Yehoshua Porath and others argue that the situations are fundamentally different, with the Jewish migration seen as the fulfillment of a Zionist dream, unlike the Palestinian exodus, which resulted in significant loss and displacement for the Palestinian people. Finally, there's criticism towards how Israeli historians have traditionally leaned heavily on Israeli archival sources, potentially limiting the scope of their narratives. Rosemary Esber, an American historian, points out that this reliance, even among the new historians, might have constrained their understanding and portrayal of the events of 1948, with Ilan Pappé being a notable exception for seeking a broader array of sources. Thanks for watching. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more content.